this, but I dare say Ernest will be 40 or 45 before he settles down. Then all his previous infidelities will work together to him for good if he is the boy I hope he is. Above all," she continued, "do not let him work up to his full strength except once or twice in his lifetime. Nothing is well done nor worth doing unless, take it all around, it has come pretty easily. Theobald and Christina would give him a pinch of salt and tell him to put it on the tails of the 7 deadly virtues." Here she laughed again in her old manner, at once so mocking and so sweet. "I think if he likes pancakes he had perhaps better eat them on Shrove Tuesday, but this is enough." These were the last coherent words she spoke. From that time she grew continually worse, and was never free from delirium till her death, which took place less than a fortnight afterwards, to the inexpressible grief of those who knew and loved her. Chapter 36. Letters had been written to Miss Pontifex's brothers and sisters, and one and all came post haste to Roughborough. Before they arrived the poor lady was already delirious, and for the sake of her own peace at the last, I am half glad she never recovered consciousness. I had known these people all their lives, as none can know each other but those who have played together as children. I knew how they had all of them, perhaps Theobald least, but all of them more or less, made her life a burden to her until the death of her father had made her her own mistress, and I was displeased at their coming one after the other to Roughborough, and inquiring whether their sister had recovered consciousness sufficiently to be able to see them. It was known that she had sent for me on being taken ill, and that I remained at Roughborough, and I own I was angered by the mingled air of suspicion, defiance, and inquisitiveness with which they regarded me. They would all, except Theobald, I believe have cut me downright if they had not believed me to know something they wanted to know themselves, and might have some chance of learning from me, for it was plain I had been in some way concerned with the making of their sister's will. None of them suspected what the ostensible nature of this would be, but I think they feared Miss Pontifex was about to leave money for public uses. John said to me in his blandest manner that he fancied he remembered to have heard his sister say that she thought of leaving money to found a college for the relief of dramatic authors in distress. To this I made no rejoinder, and I have no doubt his suspicions were deepened. When the end came I got Miss Pontifex's solicitor to write and tell her brothers and sisters how she had left her money. They were not unnaturally furious, and went each to his or her separate home without attending the funeral, and without paying any attention to myself. This was perhaps the kindest thing they could have done by me, for their behaviour made me so angry that I became almost reconciled to Alethea's will out of pleasure at the anger it had aroused. But for this I should have felt the will keenly, as having been placed by it in the position which of all others I had been most anxious to avoid, and as having saddled me with a very heavy responsibility. Still it was impossible for me to escape, and I could only let things take their course. Miss Pontifex had expressed a wish to be buried at Paleham. In the course of the next few days I therefore took the body thither. I had not been to Paleham since the death of my father some 6 years earlier. I had often wished to go there, but had shrunk from doing so, though my sister had been 2 or 3 times. I could not bear to see the house which had been my home for so many years of my life in the hands of strangers, to ring ceremoniously at a bell which I had never yet pulled except as a boy in jest, to feel that I had nothing to do with a garden in which I had in childhood gathered so many a nosegay, and which had seemed my own for many years after I had reached man's estate, to see the rooms bereft of every familiar feature, and made so unfamiliar in spite of their familiarity. Had there been any sufficient reason, I should have taken these things as a matter of course, and should no doubt have found them much worse in anticipation than in reality. but as there had been no special reason why I should go to Paleham, I had hitherto avoided doing so. Now, however, my going was a necessity, and I confess I never felt more subdued than I did on arriving there with the dead playmate of my childhood. I found the village more changed than I had expected. The railway had come there, and a brand new yellow brick station was on the site of old Mr. and Mrs. Pontifex's cottage. Nothing but the carpenter's shop was now standing. I saw many faces I knew, but even in 6 years they seemed to have grown wonderfully older. Some of the very old were dead, and the old were getting very old in their stead. I felt like the changeling in the fairy story who came back after a 7 years' sleep. Everyone seemed glad to see me, though I had never given them particular cause to be so, and everyone who remembered old Mr. and Mrs. Pontifex spoke warmly of them and were pleased at their granddaughter's wishing to be laid near them. Entering the churchyard and standing in the twilight of a gusty, cloudy evening, on the spot close beside old Mrs. Pontifex's grave, which I had chosen for Alethea's, I thought of the many times that she, who would lie there henceforth, and I, who must surely lie one day in some such another place, though when and where I knew not, had romped over this very spot as childish lovers together. Next morning I followed her to the grave, and in due course set up a plain upright slab to her memory, as like as might be to those other graves of her grandmother and grandfather. I gave the dates and places of her birth and death, but added nothing except that this stone was set up by one who had known and loved her. Knowing how fond she had been of music, I had been half inclined at one time to inscribe a few bars of music, if I could find any which seemed suitable to her character, but I knew how much she would have disliked anything singular in connection with her tombstone, and did not do it. Before, however, I had come to this conclusion, I had thought that Ernest might be able to help me to the right thing, and had written to him upon the subject. The following is the answer I received. Dear Godpapa, I send you the best bit I can think of. It is the subject of the last of Handel's 6 grand fugues, and goes thus: music score. It would do better for a man, especially for an old man who is very sorry for things, than for a woman, but I cannot think of anything better. If you do not like it for Aunt Alethea, I shall keep it for myself. Your affectionate godson, Ernest Pontifex. Was this the little lad who could get sweeties for 2d, but not for 2d halfpenny? Dear, dear me, I thought to myself, how these babes and sucklings do give us the go-by surely. Choosing his own epitaph at 15, as for a man who had been very sorry for things, in such a strain as that, why it might have done for Leonardo da Vinci himself. Then I set the boy down as a conceited young jackanapes, which no doubt he was, but so are a great many other young people of Ernest's age. End of chapter 36. Recording by Rhonda Fetterman.